One thing I wanted to talk to you about some point was ideas about evidence collecting online. It's something I've been tossing
Yeah,
around, is like not as like it's not the canonical debate. One of the things ideas around the canonical debate is that it's supposed to create an ecosystem or be part of an ecosystem, right? Um, and these are some principles I like to set out. Like the guys at Ysaurus were a little concerned about this at first until they understood. The canonical debate is meant to be fully free, open source, public utility type thing, right? Um, and like at the
hmm
very beginning of this kind of projects, I even thought, oh, if I got traction with this, it would be the kind of thing like as a startup. I think startups was the kind of thing that
right,
if we got traction, Google would want to buy because it's a whole new kind of
right.
signal. Not it's not likes and dislikes. It's actual political opinions, which is a very strong signal.
hmm
Um, and it was
Yeah.
exactly the moment when it was like,
GDPR knows about that.
yeah, I don't want to sell this to Google. I think that wouldn't be the right
Right.
direction for this project. And also there's a question always, about trust. And I think if anything has any sort of commercial aim, it loses instantly a lot of trust, and it instantly becomes
Yeah.
open to accusations of censorship or control and that sort of thing. So in the end, the canonical debate is to be a public utility. It should be fully decentralized so that nobody can censor all the things that blockchain is supposed to solve. The canonical debate, I think, should have, but that doesn't mean commercial enterprises or applications are not permitted. It's not like GPL or something that's viral and you can't build anything on it. It's meant to support an ecosystem of commercial endeavors as well. It just
hmm
needs to have there needs to be something like we've talked about wanting to provide different views is something that comes up a lot. Like, people, one simple one is I want to show my point of view. Another one
hmm
is like the canonical, not the Society Library is one of our partners. I don't think Jamie's made it to any of the meetings you've been in,
hmm
but they are focused specifically on American politics and
hmm
on collecting popular viewpoints and organizing the maps according to popular political opinions, or what does she call them? She calls them positions, right?
hmm
Popular positions that people take. So they do a lot of work to figure out what are the common positions that people defend and organize the
And why
ground
is that?
according to it.
And why is that interesting to the Society Library?
That's kind of the goal of the Society Library. Um,
Okay. Yeah, I don't
is
guess I know what it is exactly. But
I
when I
mean,
hear library, I wouldn't think, mapping political stances or
you think grab
positions.
everything and store it, right, and make it
Yeah, I
accessible.
mean, yeah, organize
Um,
information for access.
yeah, there's I don't have a clear answer to that question, but I do know that it's Jamie's vision to focus on what are maybe the highest
Oh,
impact discussions.
I see.
Um,
So it's
and
this. I see now. I'm looking at their at the mission page. It's not a library for society. It's a library of society. So the Society Library extracts arguments, claims, and evidence from various forms of media to compile databases. Dot dot dot.
yeah, yeah. So
Okay, that's
that's
interesting.
a very specific kind of viewpoint on, and they also have um, they take the opposite perspective of canonical debate, which is they prefer to curate the information and make it as high quality as possible and give it like a seal of quality before
hmm
publishing it, right?
hmm
Whereas canonical debate is crowdsource everything, let everyone in, just have
hmm
crowdsourcing tools to massage the information to the highest quality. In other words, what is it? Instead of eventually consistent, it's like eventually high quality. um, so yeah, so the Society Library wants to do it the other way around, and have sort of a seal of quality on it. And so I see that as being compatible, they can use the canonical debate as the database, but then they need a publishing layer on top that says which things they've approved to show and that sort of thing according to quality. All that is to say, these are examples of how it could have an ecosystem with specific perspectives, but we've wanted to avoid information bubbles and bias. And so one of the ideas we're toying with is, yeah, you can use the graph and you can curate the view of the graph, but you are required by license or whatever to show a widget that says how close to the full graph this thing is. So it could be, if you're only showing certain nodes, then it would be, if you're only showing 80% of the nodes, it would be like, oh, this is an 80% complete vision of the canonical debate. Or if because for a publishing type thing, you can have newer versions of a claim if that's the way. This is still in debate if you can, if they're mutable. But anyway, you could say, yeah, we published the version 2 weeks ago, and there are some changes, but we haven't approved those changes. So now you're like maybe 2 versions behind on this claim. So there's a lot of aspects to that type of widget, but it might be a solution for letting people present a view, but still require a link back to the full debate and give a measure of how much bias might be introduced here by this partial graph.
Yeah, makes sense.
That wasn't even what I was going to say. What I was going to say, that's another parenthesis. But what I was going to say is that so people can build commercial things on top. Society library isn't commercial; it's nonprofit, but people could build commercial views on top as well. Or have sites that feed data into the canonical debate. Anyway, I do have ideas for things that might be like commercial enterprises, kind of startup-y things around information that don't seek to solve the whole problem of the canonical debate. One of those is kind of crowdsourcing evidence online. Some platforms I've been thinking about doing. It's yet another idea I haven't had time, but for me, it's like if I ever get time and I need to make money, then that's probably the route I would take.
Would be the evidence collection online?
Yeah, like a crowdsourcing, gamified crowdsourcing type evidence collection website. And there's lots of different twists you can put on it that makes it kind of more catchy. But I'm kind of interested in exploring those ideas at some point.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah, because I think if you're not trying to solve the whole problem like we are with the canonical debate, it gives you a lot more leeway to not have to be so trustworthy or not have to be so. Like all of us, our first attempts at this are very, what I call straight-laced, right? They're very, highbrow. There's a lot of bad stuff going on the internet, and we're going to be the reasonable people that just carefully work towards the truth, right? And it's hard to do that and grow on the internet. That's a fundamental problem of the internet.
Which part are you saying is sort of makes it difficult? Which part?
Being calm and even-footed and highbrow.
Yeah, sustainable. That's how I've been thinking of that.
Yeah.
Not breakneck investment speed.
Yeah.
Hypergrowth, not hypergrowth.
Not hypergrowth. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So,
I was just gonna pause here. Welcome, Bentley. We saw you. I didn't say hi, and we're waiting, I guess, on Marc Antoine because it's his day before we start anything official. But go ahead and finish or continue with what you were saying.
Oh, I was just gonna say I've been thinking about it similarly. I mean, when I started being interested in this problem, I was thinking, great, startup, I'll be famous, I'll be wealthy, and I'll be helping the world. And then I've been watching things for the past 4 years, and I'm like, I don't think a solution that solves this problem can be one of these hyper-growth startups, and I don't think it can be inside the walls of one of these, large tech companies because they just have different goals and mindsets nowadays. So
I
yeah.
think hypergrowth can be a sustainable model for funding a more complete solution, and I think it can be a feeder. In other words, traffic draw for the more complete solution, right? If you create a cluster of really super popular and also useful partial solutions, right? Then
Hmm.
you can create them as part of a group and say, hey, this is what we're building that solves all the all the things you say are bad about this other site. We're solving it here. Go check here. Go check there, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah. Or if nothing else, just funds
Yeah,
the
I think a
work.
lot of us have determined that, yeah, it doesn't fit the model of the hypergrowth Silicon Valley startup. It may not even be, it's going to be really hard to fund and sustain, kind of like Wikipedia has been. Um, some of the, I don't know if we want to talk about it or if y'all have other topics to talk about till Mark Antoine gets here, but
It's free
one
flow
thing,
right now. Yeah.
okay, so I'll just introduce something and y'all can tell me to shut up. I was thinking one of the funding models that I want to do for Gullybot is actually put up 2 GoFundMe pages, one for each side of the argument, and say fund researchers to go in and do all the work. And even if you fund the thing, you can say, oh, here's an article. I want you to go in and analyze this article and pull out all the information, right? And do it as 2 things, so there's a bit of competition in there.
Well, that's what one of our kind of on-off members. What's his name? I always forget. I got to pull him up here. James. Yeah, that's what James's his approach is, right? He's been trying to go to Twitter and whatever and get. I mean, he tries to get high-profile people involved, and then he wants to do like a GoFundMe type thing of crowdfund specific topics that people want to see, questions they want to see answered, or claims they want to see validated or contradicted. So he's taking that approach. Society Library is taking a slightly different, I would say like a larger scale approach of that, which is creating information packets and say, okay, now we're going after big things. Like we're doing climate change, we're doing COVID-19, and then trying to get institutional funding.
Yeah, just trying to get grants,
foundations and grants. Yeah, right. But multiple different maybe institutions all funding one bigger topic. And then like my approach was going to be just a crowdsourced version of that, which is find activist organizations on both sides of the equation.
Yeah, the target audience.
Get them to compete with each other. Just say, hey, look, they're winning here. What have they got wrong here? You better catch up.
Yeah. I think definitely for almost all reps, the first target audience to hit is either actual activists or people that are activistic, people who have a passion about a specific topic that is contentious. We want everyone to use our apps and benefit from them, but I think that's kind of like the audience that's easiest to reach and has the most value.
This is one of those nuggets of wisdom or whatever. I wouldn't call it wisdom, that's not the right word, but one of those nuggets, one of those ideas that I think is critical to this whole project, which is most things that excite people lead to filter bubbles. News headlines that are meant to either piss people off or to preach to the choir, that sort of thing. You don't get traffic if you're even-handed. So you got to choose which choir you're preaching to, essentially, and that's kind of what leads to the increasing divide. And debate is by nature what brings opposite sides together, right? So we're working on something that naturally, by incentives, automatically is an antidote to that. And the other part is debate is also something that naturally is emotional. And so we have the opportunity to draw in traffic if we do it right, and yet still get quality and get value out of it, right?
I mean, there's the disadvantage that if you're being balanced on the presentation, then it's less viral, just statistically speaking. But
yeah,
but we are handling contentious issues, which has a bit of virality, and that just made me think maybe I should split Gullybot into 2 characters and have them debating, because people like watching a fight.
Yeah, maybe that is, and that's the kind of thing. Like I never thought, and this is kind of one of the ideas behind Gruff. Gruff is kind of my alter ego for the canonical debate, which is that the canonical debate is 100% trustworthy, 100% transparent, 100% all that. Gruff comes from the Billy Goat's Gruff, and the catchphrase there is "troll the trolls," where the idea is, instead of being rational, reasonable, and even-handed, use all the techniques online of flame baiting and that sort of thing to draw people in. And then at that point, you're in an environment that promotes good information.
Hold on. So you're asking people you're specifically trying to incentivize or like orient the platform towards flame baiting. Can you go into more detail on that?
Not necessarily the platform, and this is something I haven't fully evolved, because so it could be either. There are platforms that are oriented to that. Like I thought about having something like a Trolls Den or something like that, where it's a place where people face off. What do you call it? Kind of
spar.
No holds barred debating, where you can say whatever you want, and people watch it, and people kind of tag either tag the quality, link to what they said to prove if it's true or not true, tag it as a fallacy, that sort of thing, kind of as a live event.
What's an example?
Thing could be another thing I worked at, like what's an example?
Yeah, like what are you imagining? Like Christopher Hutchins and so you're imagining like well-known people, like people who have amassed a following on YouTube, sort of sparring off, like it sort of what are all these people's names? Like some theist versus some atheist. Who are like Sam? What's his name? Right. Sam something.
Sam Harris.
Sam Harris. That's what I was trying to think of. Because
there are
just to be clear, what I was just kind of like curious about is, I mean, these types of the internet, as you're all both well aware, is a contentious place where people say offensive and like just unconstructive things. And I mean, I would be surprised if any platform that sort of incentivized sort of the worst in people, particularly if there was a degree of anonymity. I would think it would get pretty ugly quickly, right? I mean, you see my initial knee-jerk kind of reaction.
Right, yeah. I understand, but it was an emotional reaction, so that's good. There are YouTube channels that do that, and they do it as you're not meant to slag each other. It's not flame bait. It's meant to be no holds barred, but fully intellectual battle of wits on a debate topic. And these are usually like kind of quote unquote thought leaders, or people with a large following on YouTube who have a specific opinion, and they bring them together, and they bring the fans of both sides into the same chat, and then people in the chat are talking about how their guy owned the other guy or whatever. But the debate itself is supposed to be founded in good information and good arguments, and people say,
I think I understand. Yeah. So I think what you're saying is that I think it was in the canonical debate white paper towards the beginning. You're talking about certain people who like see they're sophists, or they make specious arguments. Like they're very convincing when you listen to them, in person. You're like, wow, that seems a good point. But then if you spend time contemplating the truth behind what they've said, you're like, oh wait, no, that actually doesn't really hold in this case. So I think so. I think what you're saying is it's engaging because you have these two people engaging in the type of debate that makes people interested to watch, but that because you've sort of talked about adding this meta layer on top of, okay, well, what claim was made? Okay, well, that's a logical fallacy, or oh, this has been disproved. That then you're unpacking what looked to be convincing, and really getting into the fine grained details of how the arguments would play out given more analysis. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
That's both what the canonical debate is meant to do, but what also one of these other kinds of sites could do, just in a different light. And there's lots of ways to go about it. We've talked about having kind of a temperature gauge type temperature dial on the claim statement as well. Like, what if you could see the claim stated in the most neutral language possible, but you could turn up the dial and see it in the most flame baity version possible as well. And so it would be interesting to be able to kind of show two versions of the same argument map said two very different ways. That's another way to do it. Another, but I've been thinking of all sorts of kinds of tactics. Another way to do it, and this is just to get traffic into the canonical debate in the end, where the real information sits. But another way to do it would be literally tricking people. You take, one of the things that started me off on this quest more than a decade ago now is just the horrible quality of news comment threads and other other kind of online discussions, and wanting to see somebody who's trolling or see somebody who's you just know is full of it, totally wrong, and be able to reply you're wrong, right? But not reply you're wrong in a way that makes you have to go through all the work of explaining why they're wrong and blah, 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 blah. But a simple, boom, here's a link to what you're talking about. Go look and see that you're wrong. But sometimes that's not tailored well enough to respond. And I thought about creating a website where essentially it's a fake news front, so that when it gets when the page you post a link and the page fills in with the media, it looks like a news article, but you can make the title say whatever you want. So it could be like I'm trying to think of an example that is good but won't piss people off. I don't know.
Government
well, it could be like
confirms UFOs. Just go with the current thing.
Yeah. Or confirmed 666 chip found in all vaccines, right, or something like that. or you could do something funny, like if you want to say the opposite, where it turns out chips in vaccines are meant to clean your teeth, or something like that. Whatever, something that's going to be clickbaity, and the person clicks on it, but then goes and sees the information. The actual content, right? There's a lot of ideas, and the crowdsourcing evidence is something that can feed right into the canonical debate, because the leaves, more or less, of a debate, not really the leaves, because that just continues the debate, but more or less the leaves of arguments are actual concrete evidence. So at any point, it's a very important piece that needs to be there. And so something like this that crowdsources the best evidence would be a fantastic feeder into the canonical debate. But it's also something that is fun. It's a group activity. You're teaming up with people on your side of the debate. And it's bringing in the people who disagree, because they're going to try to put holes in your evidence. So it's a much more entertaining side of something that is important and needs to be done, right?
Yeah, something you said stuck with me about trolling the trolls or replying to a troll on a news site with like, here's sort of a canonical, link to your argument and why you're wrong. And I'm curious your thoughts, because you said something after that, like, that they can go see that they're wrong. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on sort of convincing individuals of, their righthood or wrong, or, correctness or incorrectness of their like troll-like behavior? Because,
I
I
think
don't mind.
that's,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I think that's not the work of the canonical debate. I
Mhm,
think that's not what the canonical debate can fix.
mhm,
I think in general, rhetoric and persuasion have a purpose, but the canonical debate should avoid all of that. I think people who believe in false conspiracy theories, for example, are not going to be convinced. Sometimes they are. Sometimes you get really concrete, like if you can find the right piece of information that puts a crack in their belief system,
mhm,
sometimes it works. For me, I've seen it happen to me several times because I'm open to it. But I've heard of stories of people who used to be flat earthers or used to be UFO proponents who became debunkers because at some point they saw how much it was, they just couldn't prove it, and they saw evidence that everything they thought was true was false, and they took that energy and turned it into debunking rather than into trying to prove that theory. So it can happen. Maybe a preponderance of evidence like the canonical debate can provide will do it. I think the canonical debate will be more effective at preventing people from going down that rabbit hole in the first place.
mhm.
Because at some point it becomes part of who they are, and at that point it's almost impossible to change their minds. But there's a moment when they're just learning about it. It's like, well, have you thought about that? Have you thought about why is that not that? Why is that not that? Well, if you crowdsource it across the whole world, you're going to have the answers to every single one of those questions. Any question somebody can make, people can debunk, and it's set there in stone, so you don't have to do it over and over and over again, right? So it can prevent people from falling down that kind of rabbit hole.
How would you imagine a system like that countering, just like brigading, or where, like, let's say there's a part of the site that's just really not interesting to a lot of people who tend to be interested in debunking, what would be considered mainstream things that are false, like flat earthing. So there's, people generally don't want to engage in the flat earth, say, maybe argument. So there's not a lot of, widespread attention by people who are sort of more, even-minded or have more mainstream views. So that's one. And then, but there's a lot of attention on this area by flat earthers, because like that's something that they identify with or they care strongly about. And so that area of the site could just grow and grow and grow content wise, and it could look overwhelming that the evidence is in favor of flat earth, because that's just where people have the motivation to spend the time creating content. And like there's a mismatch between attention and motivation, and people are not motivated to look at it because like, flat earth, come on, give me a break. And then other people are like, no, flat earth, absolutely, I'm going to write 1,000 different versions of this claim so that people can see just how true this is. And someone coming there, all they can see is the thousands of claims in favor of flat earth, because that's where all the content has been made.
So yeah, so the first point is like 1,000 versions of the same claim. The system solves by not allowing thousands of versions of the same claim. They have to be different claims, deduping, right?
Well, but that's something we still have to prove out, right? Is how good is the system at identifying claims? How does it represent different claims? Because if it's a human moderator, that's going to be exhausting to have to figure out which one of these thousands are all the same or not. And to the degree there's an editorial layer, now you're losing the sense of sort of independence and even-handedness. Like, oh, we had a claim on there and the editor said that it was a canonical this, and he's wrong or she's wrong. Like, that's not how the debate goes. Like, I object. This is a biased site. So I mean, I agree that and to some degree maybe I misspoke. I said versions of the same claim, because that's just what I was saying, sort of saying at the time. But you can imagine someone who learns how the system works,
Right.
and they learn how to, create different enough claims that now they really can't be all put into the identical, this is the same claim. Like, no, they're different, but they're also similar enough that they all are kind of proving the same thing. I think I mean, you thought about this.
I get your point.
No, someone
Yeah.
could figure that out.
So yeah, so there's a lot of different points to respond to here, but so the multiple versions of the same claim one and whether deduping will work or not, it has to be tried. It has to be tried, and it's empirical. So that's my thesis, is that it's possible. You can use statistics to help with this, which means, like I think it will be, like I said, kind of choosing the primary keys based on disambiguations. And I think these disambiguations will exist in a knowledge graph. And, part of the knowledge graph will have to be created within the canonical debate. So you could create your own disambiguations maybe. But so if your primary key is, UFO means this, and that picture is that, and this shows that, these are all the definitions, and then you're going to create variations of the definitions in order to make them different claims. The question is, how common are these definitions in that case? It moves the question of how many claims are there, supported or unsupported, to, are they using common definitions, or are you creating standalone definitions? In that case, it's kind of, you've made this thing up out of whole cloth, as opposed to using common knowledge, right? So that sort of thing can be shown in the site, and even just kind of weed it out so people don't even see it. Those are questions we haven't gotten to.
And let me jump in on there when you're ready.
That's it for that point, I guess. If you have anything to say about DD.
Yeah, just on that whole point, is that there's a lot of challenges with this, and whenever we kind of bring up these ideas, and I'm sure you've probably also gotten this too, Carl, is that people kind of ask that question and similar questions. But that's all kind of besides the point. It doesn't matter whether brigading will still be a tactic in this system, because that's a tactic in all systems, including verbal speech. So if we just have something that checks, at least they're not duplicating the exact same text, then that will be one step better. And then over time, we'll improve that process and make it more automated. So not tackling that issue does not mean that these ideas won't work. So I'm okay with starting it, but that is something we want to tackle. So there's quite a few things like that. And also, and I don't know if you asked Tim the question about changing people's minds, and that's not the goal of the CDL, but that is one of the goals of GoalieBot in my process. So it's funny because a lot of people say, well, you can't change people's minds. And I'm like, people change their minds all the time. And science has told us it's really hard, but it's not impossible. And if I make it 1% easier, think how much better the world will be in 10 years if it's 1% easier to change your mind towards the truth.
Yeah, that's where I think, like, you can change, it's easier to change minds if you catch them right when they're trying to make up their mind about the thing. There's a lot of, It's a first time for any topic, and if the canonical debate is as used as Wikipedia, then the first time you're like, oh, I hadn't thought about this. Is it better to have standardized testing or no? And you go and look up the pros and cons of that before you start, getting fully convinced by somebody else that that's the right. Is that true? Is that true? Let me go check. But yeah, so the deduping is something we will. I have my thesis for how that can work, and I think it'll work, but we have to try it out. The question of people not wanting to engage, I would argue, is very largely based on the fact that it's not worth it. And it's not worth it because no matter how many times you show that video was not a UFO, people are going to post it as proof of UFOs, because you can't actually defeat bad evidence It just keeps popping up, right?
Mhm.
You're never done. That's why people tire and give up. But the incentive to combat something like that is so much higher if it's one and done. And for contributing in general to the public debate, when you know that you're like this is what the difference between Kialo or any other debate site and the canonical debate if it works, right? This is the magic equation part that it would have to work. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy sort of thing. But any site that is as popular as Wikipedia and that can be considered to be permanent will be worth people's time to go and contribute. Because a lot of the why should I bother is just based on the fact that it doesn't make a difference and it's just going to disappear. So
that, and it only takes one person in this side of the system because we've done a lot of there's fewer duplicates, and there's usually one person in the world that's willing. I mean, I'd see this guy Portholer on YouTube. He's always doing anyways, he does a video every week just combating these guys in climate change. Portholer 41 or something like that. And it's just amazing to see how much work he puts into it. I mean, I think he's getting enough views on his YouTube. Something like that. I'd have to look him up. But there's always kind of like some person that got burned by him or had a so I guess that goes back to Tim's point. Now that they have a centralized place that they only have to debate it once, maybe twice, and dedupe them a little bit, it makes their efforts a lot more impactful. So I guess I'm just repeating Tim. There we
go. Uh-oh, it's not canonical.
Maybe we're aligned. Then maybe we're.
Yeah, after all these years of working together, we can give each other's. Well, Tim thinks.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that these problems are tractable given enough time, and I certainly think there's benefit to collecting things together. And part of my reasons for asking these questions, I mean, these are usually the questions like I would get. So I spent a lot of time I don't know if a lot of time, but I spent a few years going to the CredCon, and I'm not sure how to describe the rest of this group, but there's a group of people involved in this one sphere. That was like went to Mozilla Fest and Ozfest, and they have like a sort of separate CredCon associated with that. And I never got traction with an idea like this, and I was always really surprised that I was like, why don't people realize that this is a worthwhile thing? And so I was very excited then to find. I found it through Socrates to find the canonical debate lab meeting, because I was like, okay, great, finally here's some people who get that this is kind of how the problem should be approached. So I it's not that I'm a disbeliever in the utility or possibility, and I like the way you put it, kind of Bentley, is that it's like even incrementally better is a lot better, and yeah, and I agree that part of the way to think of the problem is like, well, fine, sure, we're not solving everything, but like if it's better than what we had before, then like why are we should be working on it, and the way we can tweak things, I think can really work over time.
And I say a lot that this is really a problem with, or at least the problem we're trying to solve is a problem with the information architecture of the web, right? The web is designed in a way that doesn't allow for the accumulation of information. Sort of or rather, the aggregation of information. I'm not sure the right term there, because it certainly accumulates a lot of information. It just doesn't accumulate it all in the same. So organizing the information, perhaps, right?
Yeah, it reminds me of something I heard at some point that who was it? And one of those people that founded the internet, like Netscape. Maybe it was Mark Andreessen. He was one of his initial ideas in the late 90s was like he really wanted to have, I think, a commenting layer on the web, and he really wanted to have multi-links. I think that both those ideas were from him. And I think that to some degree is related to what we're talking about, is that when a hyperlink can only link to one thing, you're kind of limited in what you can do. Whereas in a sense, if you can sort of like, well, these are all the possible, things that this could link to. Like when I think, a lot of times you see in a newspaper a sentence that purports to claim something, and then either in that sentence or nearby a hyperlink to something, and that's sort of it. That they link to one thing as evidence or as for further reading, and that's it. But that's not the way knowledge works, or especially people who are sort of looking to learn about the proposition that was claimed. They need they need a canonical place to go where, okay, this is the claim, then okay, how do I learn more about it?
But people don't want to usually don't want to learn more about it. They just want the answer, right? It's like Alexa. Is standardized education the right approach? Alexa doesn't know. She'll give me a Wikipedia page or something, which just describes the thing. So you just want to be able to ask that question or see, is this claim true? You want to go to one place. Okay, true isn't something that, but you don't want to see, when you have that question, you don't want to see, I found 3,000 pages all talking about this. You don't want to do that.
Right.
You want to go, okay, give it to me in a nutshell. What are the fors and against? And are those fors and against true? The cliff notes of debates, right?
Yeah. So I think I presume you're kind of insinuating that Canonical Debate Lab should have that sort of give me the pros and cons in a structured way. Like, do you think that needs clustering of user opinion, or how are you going to make sure that
those are different
all
things.
Or are you thinking that just the canonicalization process will sufficiently summarize and make things tractable, and like you won't have like here's three? Because I personally think even with canonicalization of making these claims all the same, I think you're still going to end up with 1,000 different entries that the person we could look at, and then then questions of ranking. Okay, how do we get the importance at the top? And even with ranking, it's like, well, then there's questions of how minority report sort of thing, like the weaker voice, which may be true, is going to be drowned out by the louder voices.
Yeah,
I've been thinking clustering would be a way to handle it.
Louder voices don't exist. You remove louder voices. That's one of the main goals of the canonical debate. All claims are made anonymously. All arguments are made anonymously. One of the goals stated in the white paper.
Just removing it, identity doesn't remove louder voices. I mean, I didn't mean louder in terms of this person has authority, I'm gonna listen to them. I meant more like
deduplicating removes louder voices, because you can't repeat the same argument over and over and over again. And that's part of what makes it louder. What makes it louder? What makes it louder is you have a privileged media presence, right? You have a louder voice in that sense. You have some sort of sense of authority. So those are removed by that sort of thing. The other one is you just have a way to repeat the message more often, right? So that's, you have a bot network or something. Another way is how to say things in a way that grabs attention or convinces people better than other people, which is the rhetoric and persuasion side of things, which means to avoid that kind of bias, neutral text, right? And it would be interesting to see things in a less neutral form, but the default view should be neutral as much as possible. Now, so that's the louder voice part. It's in the white paper that one of the goals is to make the debate around any claim understandable. I think it's written in under 30 seconds. I'd be happy in under a minute, which is more or less what Chialo does. Now, there's the excellent point of, okay, there's going to be 1,000 arguments on either side eventually. And so you need to both prioritize and, the question is, are those really worth reading? Are they really different arguments? Those things. The question of prioritizing That's what scoring is for. You heard us talking about scoring. Scoring is dangerous for a couple reasons. One, probably one of the most useful signals is the popular vote of do I agree with this or disagree, but that's full of bias. And that it immediately imposes or creates bias for the reader. I don't have a good solution for that in terms of prioritization. We've talked about, how about if the person, when they first see a claim, they don't see the scores and they have to go through and score things themselves before they get to see the popular score. And that might help eliminate one kind of bias. It might also just create Chrome plugins that automatically vote 50% on everything for you. So you see, there's workarounds to that, unfortunately. So we have to think about the solution to that problem. But there's no doubt the popular score is a useful signal, a valuable signal for that sort of thing. You could do something like instead, the ones that have the deeper tree beneath them are going to be on the top, or the most balanced tree. There might be other types of scoring you could do, sort of like a Gullybot reason score type scoring that is based on the structure of the map rather than on people's opinions. There might be other measures that are more neutral way of providing good content at the top and the crappy stuff at the bottom. Maybe we'll have to look at that as time goes on. So I would think that in any given claim, you don't need more than 5 pros or cons that are going to be the big ones. The big ones are the ones that really, if you believe this is true, abortion is one I commonly think about, because abortion has really strong pros and cons on both sides. But there aren't that many arguments to abortion. There are different kinds, there are different variations on the abortion argument, like which term, what about rape victims, what about this and that, right? But those are actually not the same claim as the general abstract or ambiguous, should abortion be legal, right? It should third term abortion be legal, and then should third term abortion be legal in this case. That gets to the other thing we need to get into our design, which is the general, we call it the general to specific relationship, which is exactly, should abortion be legal is a more general case, is a more general claim than should third term abortion be legal, right? But there are other ways of slicing it as well, depending on your definition of legal, depending on your whatever. Those are different claims and not arguments. Having 1,000 arguments on either side is partly a question of, was this argument pointed at the most relevant claim? Because when I give up the immigration is bad example is another one I use for general to specific. You could say, well, immigration is bad because immigrants to Detroit in the 80s damaged the economy, right? So that's an argument for against or in support of immigration is bad, right? But it's also an argument, even more an argument in support of immigration was bad for residents of Detroit in the 80s. Separate claim. And so you can use that argument across the whole spectrum of immigration is bad debates. But the relevant, and this is why relevance score is interesting. And some of it, I think, could, if you had a primary key for claims, you could match the relevance of the underlying base claim of an argument to its conclusion, right? By how much their disambiguation elements match. Because if you're taking evidence from Detroit in the 80s, it's automatically going to match more a claim about immigration in Detroit in the 80s than the generic immigration is bad claim. So, you know, perhaps we can cut down the number of relevant arguments in any one claim if we solve this general to specific issue, and we match each argument to its more specific claim and kind of clear it out from the top level discussion. To some degree, the specific claim, more specific claim, becomes an argument in support or against its general one. Well, if immigration was bad in the 80s in Detroit, that supports that immigration is bad overall. Well, somewhat, but not totally. Those are definitely things we started grappling with and have not come close to finishing. But I think that's tied to disambiguation, and what in the white paper I talked about it being a knowledge graph. Right? If you match up elements on a knowledge graph and there's a relationship between elements, you know, Detroit is a city in Michigan, is a state in the United States, is a country in North America, is a continent in the world, on the planet Earth, then you've got this hierarchy of relevance, essentially, of what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's the end of that thread of thought.
Yeah, well, I mean, the only thing I'm feeling kind of in relation to that is, I think kind of I'm thinking of it this way, and I think, you know, kind of watching and talking with Stephen, he's kind of maybe thinking this way too, is that general to specific thing is not particularly suited to a sort of a layman's engagement. Like I think this reminds me of something I wanted to mention earlier, is that I wonder if, you know, the different tools could benefit from sort of user personas. You know, it's like, this person is just you know, someone who's likely to come and read and sort of passively consume. You know, this person is someone who's not going to come to the site at all, but, you know, how does the site, you know, interact with that person through
Right.
other people who come to the site? This person's going to be like a heavy user. They're going to curate, they're going to, you know, learn how the system works, understand its underlying entities, and, you know, carefully be engaged. And yeah, so I find the general specific interesting, but it's a type of abstraction that may be a bit formal for a lot of users.
Disambiguation is something that needs to be done well, and we can't ask the average person to come in and create their claims with full disambiguation well done. So yeah, the curation process needs to help with that. We want to let people come in and make a mess of things, and then have the system clean it up after them, right? We want to avoid spam, right? So we would need to identify what is spammy behavior versus, you know, what is somebody who's on a learning curve here. It's also, so part of the answer is, yeah, I think it should be open to people putting in an argument in the wrong place, and then letting people who understand the debate better and understand the system better move it over to where it's most effective. This is where Stephen and I fully disagree, is he wants it all to be left behind. And he agrees that there should be a second layer where it kind of you can view everything in the quote unquote right place. I think having the mess visible just invites more mess, because people will react to the mess. And then you're not debating the content, you're debating the structure or just the way it was stated or whatever.
So this is something that I didn't like about Kialo. Is like, if I'm going to personally, and again, here's the danger of, you know, being personally invested in something, but if I'm personally going to spend my time carefully curating an argument, like, I would at least like a way to be able to share that or refer back to it. Like, this is kind of how I look at it, and this is how I did it. But with Kialo, you know, moderators of a dialogue, or they call them debates, I forget what their actual name is, but, you know, they can just move things around. And yeah, you can see the history, but I have no way of using the tool now to look at the the problem the way I looked at it. Like the editors have moved it to where they thought it was more appropriate, and that didn't sit well with me. And it's just I guess in a similar way with Wikipedia, I have contributions to the site, but they just sort of fly away into the wind as editors disagree with what I've added, or someone comes and edits later, which I mean, to some degree that's good. Hopefully someone built off of what I added, but there's no real way, there's no space for me, if that makes sense. And this is something I don't know if you all have talked about, is this concept of online space. So like, what are the spaces you're creating online? To what how do they match up with people's individual contributions or their feeling of connectedness with the tool? And if I'm putting out content, but then curators are kind of moving it around, like I don't have a space in this tool. I'm putting in stuff, and then it's getting moved around by people who I may or may not have an ability to interact with. And that, to me, that is, I don't know, concerning, I guess would be the way I describe it.
That is a very good, valid point, and I don't have a solution to that, and I may never. It may just be that the canonical debate is a void space, personal space.
Maybe it has to be that. Design takes that into account.
Marc-Antoine's design takes it into account. My fear is creating spaces creates room for you to create a bias and influence other people by not letting them see the whole picture. Part of the question is, were those changes a net improvement on the information there or not? And some of that's in the eye of the beholder, and some of that is easily just heuristics. And I'm sure Wikipedia has the same issue, because Wikipedia has its standards for what, citation needed, weasel words, that sort of thing, where they have their guidelines. And generally that sort of thing leads to better quality content, right? So if you used weasel words and somebody says you used weasel words and they change it to a very specific statement with an outside link to a reference that shows it, you may be upset they did that to your beautiful text, but I would say it was a net gain for everybody else, right? And maybe you're disincentivized to participate because of that. But I think you'll find people wanting to participate anyway, just because they're helping out. I believe that. It may be that at some point this problem is 80% solved and the people no longer care, and it slides back into people not contributing. I don't know. The other part of that is well, two other parts of that. One is the ecosystem idea, which means there would be ways to present your view of what you think is right in this debate. You could create your own web page and pull in the information from the canonical debate. It would just need that widget to say, oh, your viewpoint only shows 50% of the whole thing, right? Something like that. And here's a link back to the full debate. Another tool we've been talking about that's maybe built in or not is a way to actually present your, you're taking off? Okay. Yeah, I normally have a hard stop, but it just got moved, so I got a little more time.
I'm going to head out. Yeah. Chuck, keep talking.
Yeah, I could probably do a few more minutes, but then I have to kind of check to see what's going on at the workday starting.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess finishing this thought is, because you can plug in different scoring models, it would be neat to, and you have your personal score. I don't know if we've talked about that. It was in the white paper, but the idea of that is
I haven't gotten past scoring.
Yeah, this I think is really cool and useful, which is like one of the killer features, I think. My dog just shut up. Is you can score all these different claims and arguments so that you've recorded what you believe and what you don't believe. And if you accumulate your score over time, the system can start to highlight where you're sort of contradicting yourself, right? Oh, you said this was important, and here you're saying it's not important. It's just a flag for you to investigate your own assumptions, right? And see what happens if you change your mind on this a little bit. Then there's the popular view. You can see how you diverge from the popular view if you want. You should be able to say, show me the graph for somebody who completely disagrees with me on this claim. You know, it would have to pick it at random, and anonymously, but it could show you a belief graph for somebody else. And then another thing you should be able to do is like publish your personal score. This is how I feel about this debate. You know, this is exactly why I think this is true, or why we should do this, or whatever. Boom, that's my view. That's opinions. That's not contribution. That's not your space in the sense of what you created. So yeah, that's not fully supported in my.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's one thing I could definitely excited about is it's really interesting to see people who are motivated around the same basic concept, but then have different sort of different approaches to different things, because it operating largely in my own space, you kind of you sort of lose track of alternatives, and so seeing how the contrast between, okay, this approach could do it this way, this approach could do it that way is pretty cool.
Yeah, no one person that's come into the group is 100% aligned with anyone else in the group. It's really fascinating to see. It's frustrating but fascinating. It's frustrating to try to get something built that way, but it's you learn a lot. The one person probably most aligned with me, I would say, is that guy Venrix that did debate map.
Okay. Yeah, I think he's in Seattle. I looked him up in Google. Yeah.
His name's Stefan, and he doesn't like to participate in meetings, which is why you haven't seen him. And maybe why I think he agrees with me so much is because he hasn't had much opportunity to disagree with me on the details. Yeah, but he fully agrees with most of the things I say about how to model it and all that stuff. We disagree with on the user interface, because I want to see a columnar pros and cons Chialo type layout, and he did a graph, a mind map style layout.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and my concern with this mind map layout, I'm trying to figure out how to get out of this settings view. I have to reload it. Is whether it like how it'll handle a mobile view. I mean, there's probably some way, but
well, one of the
because I think that's
ideas we've definitely all agreed on is that there should be no one official interface for the canonical debate. It's a very complex way to organize information, and each view you're going to have is going to favor certain things. So in my experience, the mind map layout is really good for curating, because you can drag and drop arguments around and that sort of thing. It's good, I think, for getting a quick overview several levels deep, because in the columnar layout, it's really hard to see the threads after a while.
Right. I like that about Ysaurus too, is that they have a sort of columnar layout, but it expands, which at least I guess on a desktop browser was tractable. I don't know how that would work in mobile, but
yeah. And so you definitely need to come up with like different mobile views, and that's something I'm not good at, so I haven't even tried to come up with something. But I'm happy to let people take a stab at it, right?
Yeah, that's one thing. It sort of was occurring to me about this group is that it's all very, sort of technical implementer focused. And so I think we might have blind spots around design, might have blind spots around community. I don't know, what are some other ones that might have some blind spots around? I don't know. I'm blind there, so I don't know what I don't know.
Felix can help somewhat with community. He's especially Felix. He's the one who's been traipsing around Europe. He's in Germany now. And he's done work around moderation and that sort of thing. You can give some feedback. We had other members who were a lot more focused on community and collaboration and that sort of thing, but they haven't stuck around. Yeah, Jamie is good whenever she joins because her perspective is completely non-technical. It's a lot more focused.
Is that the society library?
Yeah.
Okay.
And she's very focused on analysis of information and I don't even know how to sum up what her perspective is. A little bit of sociology, a little bit of content analysis, a little bit of community, or well, not community organizing, but she's working on organizing analysts in a pipeline to get good content, right? Good validated content.
Nice.
Yeah.